in the next 5 to 10 years, supply chain consulting is going to be one of the biggest growth areas inside of the broader consulting industry. So whether UPS decides to take advantage from a services perspective or not, there are firms out there who are raking in the cash just due to the environment we find ourselves in right now. Good morning and welcome to Market Outsiders. It's Tuesday, October 28th. Today we're talking about UPS. Why should you care about UPS? Because we're about to hit the holiday season, and if you do any online shopping at all, chances are UPS is going to be delivering gifts to your house or to the houses of your loved ones. Before we dive into UPS today, if you have not yet rated, subscribed, or reviewed Market Outsiders, please take 30 seconds to do that right now. It helps us out and helps other people find this content as well, and just lets them know that this is helpful. It's quick hitting business insight and news that they need to prepare for case interviews, that they need just to up level their business acumen. Thanks so much. While you're finishing that up, I'll welcome in Jenny Ray. Jenny Ray, how are you doing today?
Hi, Naman. Good to see you. I have a confession to make. I'm thinking about going early Christmas this year. So I'm usually a pretty solid shopper. I do a lot of gift idea collecting throughout the year, but I am a pretty hardcore, only decorate after Thanksgiving kind of Christmas person. And I'm thinking next week, we might just get right into it. So that's a big novelty in our family. And I'm not sure about you guys, but do you subscribe to the early Christmas decoration? We've been late Christmas late takedown. So we do Christmas decorations from after Thanksgiving to February. So we try to take them down by Valentine's Day. We just hate to be ahead of the curve on that kind of thing. But yeah, any opinions on the holiday experience for you?
I'll be honest with you, I've got a lot of strong opinions, but this is not an area where I have strong opinions. So to me, it's like once November 1st hits, it's the holidays. And in my mind, I think Thanksgiving and Christmas just turn into one long holiday season. I know there's a lot of purists out there that are like, no, they're two distinctly different holidays. I'm like, it's just one big holiday season. I like
Those are
that.
just football purists, man.
Maybe.
That's not, yeah.
Maybe, but I do love the holidays. I don't necessarily have a strong opinion on what day the decorations should go up. I'm a procrastinator, so we tend to be on the later side, but not because we're purists, just because we have a lot of other things going on.
Yeah, I get that. Well, before we dive into UPS today, and I'm really excited about it, we did have kind of a pre-discussion, as we always do, before we decided what we were going to talk about today. And there were two topics that hit the cutting room floor. We're going to be back live tomorrow. If you want us to talk about one of these two topics, will you write us an email, a message, or a comment on YouTube today? The two topics that hit the cutting room floor were the economic reforms in Argentina and the integration of PayPal, so you can purchase things directly from ChatGPT, and that will hit in 2026. So neither one of them are necessarily things that you would have to know today. Tomorrow should be fine for those. But if one of those is interesting to you, shoot us a message and we'd love to share about those tomorrow. Mon, you ready to dive in on UPS?
Let's do it.
All right. So I want to just pop my screen up here. Look, when I look for things, I'm not just interested in reporting the news. I am always interested in trying to understand what the news behind the news is. That's the whole goal of what we do here at Market Outsiders. And so here is the CNBC article that popped this morning when I was reviewing some of the overall news. And they kind of just talked about this, right? UPS deepens job cutting as part of a turnaround plan and share surge. So a couple of years ago, Naman, I was sitting in a hotel in Indiana. I actually remember the table I was sitting at the hotel in Indiana right around this time of year. And there was a pilot at the hotel who was a FedEx pilot. And he talked a little bit about FedEx's relationship with Amazon and some of the leadership changes and the remaking of the challenges. And I just had this thought when I was talking to him, I know my parents' FedEx, but I do not know modern FedEx. I know the FedEx that was kind of we can get something to you immediately, and we have, point and spoke positioning for every one of our options. And we have flights that are generally all flying into Memphis every night. So they're leaving at 10, 11 p.m. when most other airport commercial airlines are closed. But I knew nothing about the modern version of FedEx, about their partnerships, about the revenue base. And so I use that as an opportunity to get smart about it. And I think if you don't understand UPS and FedEx, you fundamentally just don't understand e-commerce and logistics. And so it's really important to understand how these are intertwined. But what I think is particularly interesting is that both UPS and FedEx are undergoing major structural turnarounds right now. And they're doing them for what initially was a seed reason that was the same, which is that Amazon was moving more of their logistics in-house through their Amazon Prime planes, which if you've traveled, I was at the Cincinnati airport last week. I don't know if I mentioned to you that I saw an Amazon Prime plane there, but you're going to start to see more and more of those during this holiday season. You have Amazon Prime trucks, so everything is not necessarily arriving on a FedEx, a UPS, or a USPS truck anymore. So I just thought this was interesting because my first thought was that if you were building a framework for this, people would make the automatic assumption right now that there was AI as a disruptor in the space. But what you've seen is a very different dynamic in logistics. So just as a context, I would like to throw AI out the window and bring it back in only if it's appropriate, because I wanted to ask a more fundamental question, which is how would UPS reshape its business in modern times? Anything that you want to add in terms of context or background before we dive into some of the mechanics of the specific article in the UPS turnaround?
I think that's really good context and background. I think just the important thing for people to keep in mind is that for years and years, UPS's most important business relationship was with Amazon. And UPS actually, was a part of making the decision that said, look, this isn't beneficial for us anymore. Because if if you're losing money, and I don't know if they were, but it sounds like they were, if you're losing money on every delivery, then like increased volume doesn't help you. And so Amazon, like as their biggest partner, as their biggest customer, had so much leverage over them that the leadership team decided, you know what, like this isn't how we want to run our business anymore. And so, like you said, there's more going on than just the relationship with Amazon, but that was really the catalyst for a broader kind of restructuring and turnaround. And 34,000 jobs is a huge number. And so one of the things that I want to dig into is, okay, how many of these are like management or white collar jobs versus frontline jobs? And then out of the frontline pool, like how many of them are like delivery drivers? And then how many of them are taking place at the retail storefronts? And that's going to start to give us a sense of like where the new leadership team's priorities lie in terms of this turnaround.
I love that. One other thing that I just want to mention here, and I know the answer to this because I already did the work on it, but one of the questions that I started with before I dug into the details here was, is this earnings beat and the turnaround plan and the share surge today focused on just cost cutting in a lower revenue environment with tariff headwinds and potentially with the loss of this volume from Amazon? When was that realized? I was kind of wondering fundamentally if we were looking at higher margins on a percentage basis, but lower actual margins or lower revenue. And I think that part of the answer to that is a very important part of this story, because fundamentally, that's one way that you can, in the short run, juice shares, but it is not a long-term strategy for actually running a business. And so, that would frame this question super differently for me. And so I want to dive into that as well. So I think if you're good with it, let's get into the meat of it. You want to?
Yeah, I'd love to. And I don't know the answer to that. So I'm really interested to see, like, did they beat on the top line and the bottom line, or just the bottom line? Because you're right, that changes the conversation.
Yeah, and the earnings beats, this is not a finance podcast. We're not talking about like how, right, analysts or UPS guidance changed. We're really thinking about, from a management perspective, what are they doing differently, right? What are they changing? What are they fundamentally doing just to bring more profit in? So it's less like what expected versus actual was, and more the fundamentals of the business. So they surged 10% in pre-market trading. So that was kind of the context for this. And so if we dive into some of the details, the continued reading, I'm just going to get right to it, right? Revenue beat. So 21.4 billion versus expected of 20.83. So that was one of the first things that I looked for when I was going through here. And then earnings per share, really significant beat, right? 1.74 versus 1.30 expected. Now, Naman, I want to talk about this because this doesn't really go into this, but you talked a little bit about the breakdown between white collar and frontline or blue collar roles inside UPS. But why do you think that matters? And which one do you think is actually more likely to be disrupted by AI? And then one final question about it. When you're thinking about cutting a workforce like this at UPS, what was somebody doing that you no longer need them to do, and why? Or how are you fundamentally thinking about reshaping your business to be lower employee saturation across, each of the pieces. Can you just talk a little bit about the staffing piece of this, which they led with? It actually may not be the important fundamental thing. There are other things that are tucked away in here, but I still think it's interesting to talk about because it's a key point of leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I get there, I just want to say beating our expectations isn't the same as actually growing quarter over quarter. So one thing I don't see in this article is, okay, what was last quarter's performance? And we might have beat estimates and expectations, but are we actually growing? I still don't know that. And so maybe we'll find that out further down the article, but I just wanted to call that out.
And for
Okay.
UPS, really, it's year over year, right? Because you can't Q4 versus
Yeah,
Q3.
and when I say quarter over quarter, I mean Q3 of last year.
Correct. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
Yeah.
So just to make sure that everybody's clear on that. Cool.
Yeah.
Go ahead, dive in on the numbers.
So really, you're asking, okay, how does a company like UPS cut staffing? Where do they think about cutting? Like, why do they do it? Because it is a very labor intensive business. Like, you need a human being to drive your trucks and to like bring packages to storefronts and to homes. And so, like, you can't just cut down to the bone. That's not how the business model works. And so I would think, just based on what I'm seeing here, and I don't have any additional information beyond what I'm seeing here, is that a part of what's happening here is that you have layers of middle management that are being cut out. That to me is like the number one thing that I'd look at, because 14,000 of the 34,000 job cuts are happening in management. So they're like your kind of HQ corporate white collar jobs. And so part of that, I think, is stripping out of middle management. I think part of this could be a little bit of an AI story as well. Like, for example, like if you have if you had whole teams that were focused on like the tariff regime for different SKUs, different product categories, different countries, and you have like AI models or tools that can do a lot of that work now for you, and then like price accordingly, like charge like tariff rates accordingly, like that could be like a contributor to this. So I agree with you. I don't think that it's like fully an AI story, but I don't think you can completely ignore AI either, because I'm sure at least in the management workforce, some of that work is being taken on by AI, while some of that work's just being shifted to other human beings.
So quickly, just to clarify, because as you kind of talked through that, I just want to make sure it's clear. So you're saying if we were going to talk about the impact of AI, would you isolate it to the management workforce? And would you think that was a larger impact there versus the frontline workforce?
Look,
or do you think that there also could be frontline impact?
I mean, there could be frontline impact, but the first place I'd look is the management workforce. I think the management workforce, even though it's a smaller number, was probably the bigger cost center and like the bigger total number in terms of dollar savings. So I'd look there first for multiple reasons. And then when you get to the frontline workers, again, like I mentioned at the beginning, like, is that delivery drivers? Like, are you optimizing your routes, aka are you cutting some unprofitable routes? Are you consolidating routes so the drivers that remain have longer routes, bigger coverage areas? Are you moving to some like driverless technology? I don't see anything in here about that. I feel like if that was happening, UPS would be like shouting it from the rooftops.
Yes,
and so
agreed.
I don't think that's what's happening. So I think there's a lot of route consolidation that's happening. There might be some cuts happening to like business deliveries. Like maybe they used to deliver to businesses 6 days a week and now they're going to deliver to 5 days a week, right? Like there might be some strategic cuts like that are happening as well. And they've just done the math and figured out, you know what, like we're not losing. This is a duopoly. It's FedEx and UPS, like you mentioned. Like we're not losing these business relationships to FedEx if we do this, right? So maybe that's a part of the calculus as well. So like if I was sitting in a case interview and just thinking through like what would be some of the implications of these job cuts, what I've said so far would be some of the places that my mind would go.
If you run a small or medium-sized business, you know how fast cyber risks are evolving. That's why I use Nord products myself. And for businesses, there's Nord Stellar. It's a threat exposure management platform that helps you spot cyber threats before they become full-blown incidents. Nord Stellar combines data breach and dark web monitoring, attack surface management, and cyber squatting protection, all in one platform. It gives you real-time visibility into leaked credentials, exposed assets, and impersonation attempts so you can act before attackers do. Think of it as seeing what hackers see and fixing it first. Right now, you can get an exclusive 10% discount on Nord Stellar with code SIMPLIFIED-10. Visit nordstellar.com/simplified to get started today.
Namana, it also says it cut its operational workforce. This actually doesn't tease out. I thought that the numbers were additive because of the estimate of 20,000, but it's possible that they cut 48,000 jobs. We might want to tie back that in because it actually says the operational workforce by 34,000. And one of the things that I would be really interested in understanding, which they probably don't break out in their documentation, is how much of that is drivers, how much of that are sorters that are in the kind of back office, how much of the operations that you see for UPS are actually outsourced or contracted, and then how many of them are in stores. So UPS has a very, very large network, one of the largest actually retail footprints in the country, not in terms of square feet, but in terms of the proximity, right? Yeah, the number of locations. And actually, I think that potentially a number of those are franchised or co-operated in a local one, the names of the local operators, which I think is kind of an interesting model. So again, if you wanted to actually dive into it, I would love to know on where those cuts were happening. Is it on the delivery side? Is it in the back end, right? Is it in the warehousing or is it in the front lines?
I'd be surprised if it was in the warehousing. Now, I could be wrong, just because I feel like you would have seen automation happen in the warehousing long ago.
We would hope so. Yeah.
And I would think so, right? Because there's a difference between automation and AI. That has nothing to do with AI. And so that has more to do with robotics. And so, but if there are sorting operations, if there are warehouses that haven't yet moved over to that kind of system, then that absolutely could be a driver of some of these job cuts as well.
I would agree. But again, I think breaking that out and understanding where they felt like they were fatty would be kind of interesting to me. And have you been into a UPS store in recent months?
I have. Usually
What did you go in for? Let's talk personal right now.
Yeah. Usually I just go in to return Amazon packages.
So Amazon's not shipping to you, but you're shipping back to Amazon,
I'm shipping back
right?
to them if I'm in a UPS store. Yeah, absolutely.
I think it would be really interesting if y'all would want to do this. This is something that we did at Bain, and you'd find really fascinating insights. You can't go person to person and extrapolate all of the insights, but you can find insights that the data won't tell you when you talk to people. And I do think it would be very interesting to go into a UPS store and either kind of like politely eavesdrop in a way that's not awkward, or just ask people like, hey, hey man, this line is long. Like, why do you think everybody's here? And kind of, start a conversation inside the store. We would do stuff like that. I did it at Circuit City before they went out of business, at Universal Studios, at Bank of America. Like I went to a baseball game with somebody from Bank of America just to chat about their business. And sometimes that insight is the richest insight that you can get to go find the data that you're actually looking for that you didn't know was there in the first place. And sometimes they're not even collecting that information or that data. So yeah, so that's pretty fascinating. I know that Kohl's has a turnaround strategy related to, having an Amazon drop point internally.
Yeah.
But I still feel like UPS is getting the lion's share of that. Like you're not doing it at FedEx. Heck knows you're not going into USPS. And UPS is kind of that like perfect middle ground, right? Where it's not the most expensive. It's not that difficult. It's not that long of a wait. But there is almost no automation in store. Like you can't just drop the
customer experience is not automated.
It's not at all.
Yeah. And a lot of like, my decision in terms of who to use to return something to Amazon is not determined by me. It's determined by Amazon. So I think it depends on the product. It depends on the size and the weight of the product. It depends on which warehouse it's going back to. Then they tell me, well, here are your options. Like it's UPS, or hey, go drop it off at Kohl's, or hey, go do this. And so the choice really isn't mine. Like I do have a menu of options, and then I just choose the place that's closest to me. But UPS isn't even always in the menu. And so it's really determined by Amazon, at least in my experience.
How interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't return anything. This is one of my fatal flaws, right? So I probably hopefully underbuy, but I also don't return anything. So I kind of, I would love to use some of that. I do return things if I grab them at a local store, and I often will select where I purchase something from so that I can return it at a local store. But this is one of my generational things, right? I still use Facebook. I confess, and I also don't return things to Amazon. But that's why I'm always fascinated when I'm in there, because I'm often in there to do notaries or other business things. And I'm sure that everybody in there is not doing what I'm there to do. Like almost everybody is shipping something.
Well, let me
Yeah.
ask you this. I think look, the stories around cost cutting, and I think, most people who have even a passing familiarity with UPS can start to think through, okay, like where the cost centers of the business would be and like how you could start to trim some of the fat. But let's talk about growth. Like, and I'll put this to you first. Like, how do you think UPS can actually start to grow revenue if it's moving away from its relationship with Amazon? Like, where do some of those opportunities exist in your mind?
Yeah. Look, I mean, it's hard to imagine anything as aggregated as this. In fact, I think this is a pretty fascinating backdrop here. Now, right down here, it actually says Amazon's total volume with UPS declined 21.2%, compared with a 13% decline. So that revenue uptick, compared with expectations, again, is higher than they expected, right? So that was one of my initial questions. My first question was, is revenue growing based on expectations? My second question, which this doesn't answer, is revenue growing versus previous years? My third question is, if you're growing revenue, how do you grow revenue? Because again, like, if you can only cut fat to a certain point, but your business is in cyclical decline if you cannot grow revenue, right? So I think one of my first questions was, what else are people shipping or buying? So I was thinking of like interesting categories that I'm noticing changes on that are non-Amazon. So like Etsy is a category, or more kind of handmade jewelry. I would guess the explosion of Shopify and using UPS as a shipment function for more custom or bespoke items is one of those areas. I actually suspect that eBay is a pretty significant participant in this space, and I don't know who shippers of record are for eBay. But like, I have a friend from high school who runs one of the coolest businesses. And maybe I should even see if we could, swindle her into somehow coming onto the pod with us. But her business is a pattern business. So she sells physical sewing patterns. And she buys them in bulk. Like when Joann Fabrics went out of business, she bought like warehouses full of these. And then she individually markets them. And, there are thrift resellers that are putting stuff up online. So I would imagine that it is higher margin, but lower concentration individual sellers and businesses that are functionally using UPS for the same reason that I talked about earlier, right? They're not as expensive as FedEx. They're more reliable than USPS. And so there's, potentially there's not a rush need for these products. They're not going to get exposed to the elements and fail. They're totally fine to go UPS ground, which I would estimate is probably the growth category for the business. But that would be another really interesting thing to look at, right? What are people wanting to send? How much are they willing to do it? Are you able to do UPS ground at a small discount on the revenue and a large discount on the cost to increase the margin on a per delivery basis? I think that would be really, really interesting. I just wanted to harken back to one other thing you said before as well, before you dive back in. You mentioned that fundamentally they kind of sat down, and I didn't remember this, so I thought it was interesting, and said, hey, like, we're losing money on every Amazon package that we deliver. We did a lot of cost segregation and cost, like we would call it, kind of like fully loaded costing, right? When you went into businesses. I think this is a very interesting area of consulting as applied right now, because it's not disruptable by AI, because the data is not already there. You actually have to go create the data. And so you actually have to identify how many people are touching each one of your Amazon packages, for how long. You're actually, capturing information that you weren't necessarily capturing before. And you're often doing it in microcosmic studies where you're not doing it holistically across your whole platform, but you're looking at, for example, one UPS store's daily volume through the entire system, rather than looking at the entire system or an entire kind of back end log. And I think that that's one of the things that I'm seeing in consulting right now is that cost oriented consulting is driving more than revenue growth consulting. So even though you asked that question, I just wanted to point that out, because I think that there is a data gap that AI can't fill without hallucinating, that is still required to operate these businesses with increasing savvy. And that kind of estimate may have been done by internal workforce at UPS, but was likely done by a or many consulting firms.
Absolutely. The reason I ask is because if I was at the management team at UPS, I'd be thinking, I'd be starting to pivot now towards top line growth. It's like, okay,
Agreed.
like we've gone through and we've done this work. Like, this is going to get us the savings that we're looking for. They're going to flow down to the bottom line. But like you said, the share price appreciation is going to be short-lived if we don't start to actually like consistently grow revenue and not just beat estimates, but beat prior year performance. And so how do you do that, right? I think that's the big challenge for UPS moving forward. And I'll just say a couple of things here. I think it's important to understand, first of all, kind of the product and service differentiation. So like UPS offers UPS ground delivery. They have kind of next day air delivery. They, like you said, they offer delivery confirmation, notary services, signing, right? Like there's all these add-on services.
Rental of PO boxes.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Right. And starting to actually figure out, okay, like what's driving the bulk of my revenue? I would agree with you. It's UPS ground. And then how can I, instead of being reliant on one relationship with Amazon, how can I build up my small business program? And how can I lock in some of these, like, maybe not like major shippers, but like medium volume shippers, but get enough of them to where like the margin is higher on each shipment. But like I have like a steady stream of business coming in because they're locked into like a year or 2 or 3 year relationship with UPS where they're getting preferential rates. They get to know the delivery driver on their route. There's like daily or every other day pickups, right? I think that's like that small to medium sized businesses, UPS is like core customer. That would be my assumption. And that's where I'd be looking to really kind of unlock some of this revenue growth. And then those customers at some point might need like next day delivery for one of their biggest clients. And so they become UPS Air customers, right? They need printing, they need PO boxes. Like they're going to come to you. Like there are like ancillary revenue opportunities that are available to you. But like if I'm UPS, I'm really focused on that small to medium sized business customer. And then anything I get from like a Jenny Ray or a Naman walking into the store is the cherry on top, but they are not my core customer. And I think a part of this conversation for UPS, as they're moving away from the Amazon relationship, has been like, who is the core customer we actually want to serve? And I think the decision they've made is it's the small to medium sized business. And I think that's the right call.
So one of the things that I think is very possible is that this is a potential pressure test or flex of longer service and longer delivery times. Like it is possible that UPS has made the assessment that they aren't going to get stuff to you as fast and you will wait longer at a UPS store to do what you have to do. You do that when you assess that you likely have a fairly captive audience, right? Not necessarily complete monopolistic power, but they could very well be testing, are you willing to wait 12 minutes in line instead of 10 in order to, decrease delivery times, but increase revenues on a per cost basis. So I would suspect that could be something that they're not going to shout from the rooftops, right? Congratulations, you're going to wait longer at UPS, but your wait is not going to turn you away. How many times have you gotten your package in the car, driven all the way to UPS, seen a line, and just been like, nah, I'm not going to go, right? You're already there. There's not that many options, like you already mentioned.
But that's what I'm saying, right? Like that is not the core customer. So they don't care, right? Like that's all ancillary revenue. I think the big test is, will we keep our big shipping accounts if like our ground delivery moves from 3 days to 4 days? I think that's the big test, right?
Correct.
And I don't know if they're doing that or not. But if a part of this job cut is cutting drivers or cutting routes, like they might start to say UPS ground is now, it's not 3 days, it's 3 to 4 days, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that extra day, right? That's where like the huge cost savings is going to come from. And if you can keep like enough of your big shipping accounts moving to like the 3 to 4 day delivery versus just the 3 day delivery, I think that's going to be the big test to, just to see if, hey, can we continue to grow revenue with less headcount? It's going to be interesting to see if they can do it. I agree with you. I think that for most small to medium sized businesses, the extra day doesn't matter because if you're shipping perishables, like you're going with a next day option regardless.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that it's pretty fascinating here. I think the main thing that people need is transparency, but not necessarily speed. And I think if they do feel like they can deliver that, right, you're going to get your package on Tuesday. Like it doesn't matter. You can make the decision at purchase whether you're happy to get it on Tuesday or not. And so, and again, if you don't have other better options that are at the same price point, like this is part of why you build big networks and moats around your business.
Yeah.
They also mentioned, and this is important for you to know, like there is just pure financial strategy in here, not operational strategy or marketing or growth. They are also becoming more of an asset light business. This is still a very asset heavy business. owning
Yeah.
trucks and owning facilities. But this is absolutely the right move for them to go through. Like initially, they probably were like, it'd be better to own than buy. But like if they haven't already, I would be if UPS wouldn't have kind of a McDonald's style metric where they actually sold all of their properties to a operating company that was separate from UPS, potentially wholly owned, or a rollout that was separate, and then leased each one of the locations back. So if you think about their physical footprint or their physical network, I think that that's really interesting. They're just freeing up cash to deploy it into some of these other investments in terms of going out and getting new accounts in the business.
Does UPS do any kind of professional services or consulting? Like, I've always wondered why companies like this didn't move into supply chain consulting. Like, they have more data available at their fingertips than probably like any other logistics company in the world. They have a brand name. They have the ability to like add on like actual like operational services like to like the strategic work that they would do. Maybe it's something they considered and just decided that's not who we want to be. But I think like having a services division that's focused on like supply chain or logistics and now like maybe tariff consulting for businesses would be like a huge potential growth driver for UPS. And I just never have heard anything about it. And with the treasure trove of data that they have, with like the ancillary revenue opportunities that would unlock, I just don't quite understand why they haven't ever pursued that.
It's so interesting. I think it would be, I would be surprised. I don't know this. Actually, we have never worked with UPS HQ on whether they even have an internal consulting strategy division. I'm sure that they have, supply chain logistics and, like you mentioned, very advanced and rich data, but it is possible that they're not even enhancing their data to the way that they possibly could to use it for anything other than their own operations. And those kinds of insights could become very valuable. But I wonder if they have to. Again, like going back to this thought, like who else do you use? It's kind of fundamentally one of the advantages of being UPS in a market like this. You, Naman, we can't start tomorrow and build a disruptor to UPS. If we did, we would build something incredibly asset light, but just think of the network that we would have to build out in order to operate that. And think about the leasing strategy and the partnership strategy. We'd have to have a partnership with an Uber or a Lyft, kind of like a driver network in a lot of these different places. We'd have to run freight, on the back end. And you're right, the supply chain is incredibly complicated. It is valuable, but it is like secondarily valuable to a lot of these other functions inside businesses. If it's not broken, it's one of the most, undisrupted businesses by technology already today. I'm talking like we don't even have cameras on every ship that's crossing the ocean, keeping track of where it is. We don't even have geolocators on every container. Like we don't, you could literally have something shipped and somebody could tell you that it's going out of port and when it might arrive. And it's like a 2-3 week window. It's like getting a PhD, like maybe next year or the year after is kind of what the message is. So logistics is a we're wildly accepting of logistics challenges as consumers. And I would expect that there is opportunity to improve there, not just for UPS and on its own, but also for many of its clients.
Especially in this cost-cutting macro environment that we find ourselves in. This is a huge cost center for businesses across sectors. And so I think they're going to start to look at supply chain more closely. I think when you've got the added complication that tariffs bring, you have to start paying attention to supply chain in a different way. So I think in the next 5 to 10 years, supply chain consulting is going to be one of the biggest growth areas inside of the broader consulting industry. So whether UPS decides to take advantage from a services perspective or not, there are firms out there who are raking in the cash just due to the environment we find ourselves in right now.
It's true. I mean, it's margin call cash, right? They're kind of like, look, it's one of the easiest places to draw a line between the work that you do and the immediate savings. Exactly. And if you're good at what you do, you save money. And that is a very easy ROI for somebody to calculate. And if you don't And if you're not good at what you do, or if you don't do what you say you're going to do, then it's not easy. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Naman. And the one great thing about supply chains and logistics is it kind of fulfills the amazing consulting mandate, which is like just as soon as you solve one problem, there's another one that's created, or another one that the market creates, or another one that you didn't think about. There's another supply sourcing issue. There's another warehousing issue. I think there's some other major opportunity there. Also, I'm, thinking about that. I don't know if UPS has ever thought about this, but one of the most interesting businesses that I studied in real estate in business school was Prologis. And I kind of, Prologis has basically set up a large amount of growth based on their Amazon relationships, which is fundamentally warehousing in these kind of non-sale leaseback situations, right? Where Amazon is just purely like, hey, we don't want to own the ground. We just want to lease. It gives us flexibility. We'll take long-term leases. I would be really interested in looking at what the asset base is for UPS, but also wondering if there are adjacencies in terms of warehousing for some of these businesses. Like, is every business holding its own information? That's really, we've talked about things that Amazon has done that are really novel. We talked about the fact that they're, generally cash flow positive because they are holding inventory and not relinquishing that cash back to suppliers until after it's already been received and delivered to the purchaser, even often until it's past the return window from the purchaser. So they're actually holding it through that period. But Amazon's warehousing strategy is part of what makes it the most powerful logistics company in the world. And so, I think that there could potentially be opportunity in offsite warehousing for UPS that they also have not explored. But if you would naturally think about doing that if you were asset heavy, I wonder if it would still be part of their strategy if they are asset light.
One last thing I'll just mention here, and this is just something that's been in the news recently, is there was something called the de minimis loophole, which said that goods coming from overseas that were worth less than a certain amount, like, didn't need customs or tariff paperwork. And that loophole has now been closed. And so I would think that adds like a huge compliance cost to UPS. And I wonder if that's a part of what's being like what's driving the cuts here is like we have a cost that has exploded somewhere else. We need to invest in technology and AI to help us like figure out like what gets routed where and like how much duty gets paid on each like good coming in. But like as a large international shipper, I would think that that loophole was a huge headwind for them this year. And so I think that this might not even just be part of like a larger turnaround plan, but like some of this layoff news might have just been shaped by a shifting environment. And then they're just having to prioritize where they invest because the rules are changing. And so, look, when we've got goods coming in from China that are worth less than $200, now all of a sudden there's a paperwork burden on us that there wasn't before. There's like a duty that needs to be paid. There's all of this things that needs to happen. And so we've got to shift some of our attention there. I'm just wondering if that's a part of the impetus for some of what we're seeing happen at UPS.
Super fascinating question. It also brings up a glitch in the matrix of what we have and haven't talked about right now, because we didn't talk about the split of their US versus international revenue. And we didn't talk about where margin really is inside the business there. We kind of very US centric talked about this conversation from a US perspective. But if Amazon's total volume declined 21.2%, we actually don't know what portion of their total volume that was. Obviously, that's going to be largely driven inside the US, where Amazon is the weightiest, but maybe their international business is significantly higher margin and there is other opportunity there. But like you mentioned earlier, Naman, that tie-in to services is really fascinating. Maybe every supplier already has a short list of 3 other places where they could source materials from in a changing tariff environment, but I can't imagine anyone better positioned than UPS to share that information with them if they didn't already know it. And I think that there is either at least customer retention opportunity or, like you mentioned, revenue opportunity to providing that kind of data and servicing. And UPS still feels to me like a stodgy old company that doesn't provide that level of service to its bulk shipping clients. But I, thank goodness, don't run a product business and don't have to think about this as a primary focus. In fact, for wine, we ship through FedEx. And so I don't even really have a shipping relationship with UPS that's significant. But I've never been more grateful than this year, 2025, that my business is largely tech services and consulting oriented.
Well, if you have worked at UPS, if you have a shipping relationship with UPS, if you are a supply chain or logistics expert and you want to weigh in on this conversation, leave us a comment on Spotify, shoot us an email. The email address is in the show notes. Share your perspective with us, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Market Outsiders. Please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe, and we'll see you back here tomorrow. We're going to be talking about one of two things. We're either going to be talking about what's happening in Argentina, or we're going to be talking about payment options inside of ChatGPT and e-commerce. And so leave us a comment. Let us know what you prefer we talk about tomorrow, and we'll see you then.